One of the reasons that I am a physician is because of Philip Berger. He's inspired me to always ask questions, to always push the envelope and not to be afraid to stand up, to advocate for patients, to seek justice where there is injustice.
I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I have 3 younger siblings. My father was a dermatologist. My mother had a tougher job staying home raising the kids. After training, I worked for over 4 years at the South Riverdale Community Health Center in my neighborhood as a salaried physician, where a lot of the activities I was engaged in began. Then worked in my own community-based practice for over 11 years, just as the AIDS epidemic was exploding in Toronto.
My first recollection of hearing of this Dr. Berger was when I was in medical school. And this takes us back to the 1980s where HIV had really reared its head and was full force.
The activities I pursued largely arose from my interactions with the patients sitting in my office. I would gaze beyond the patient and see the external conditions that were affecting their lives, making them sick, impeding recovery.
Not only was he providing care to people with HIV, but he was a very strong advocate for people in that community, for their ability to access care, for appropriate drug trials, for their participation in their care.
We would see patients from Rosedale, highly educated, professional people, and we would see people that were living on the streets. There was one common waiting room. We didn't separate people. Everyone was treated equally, and that's something I really valued in Philip.
He's had a big impact on the people of Canada in this way, this issue of physicians extra billing.
It was a very bold statement in those days to come out against the medical establishment and oppose extra billing.
Which was eventually banned in Ontario in 1986.
I think we've all benefited from his being one of the physicians and one of the leaders in that debate.
My colleagues and I are constantly seeing people whose lives are restrained by systems that are of no help. Whether it's not having a home to live in, inadequate food for kids to go to school.
He certainly understood the socio-political impact of issues on people's health, and in many ways I think he was a generation ahead on many issues.
That as an academic physician, as chief of family practice department at 2 different teaching hospitals. So I've experienced a pretty wide terrain of how to do family medicine. In addition, I spent 8 months as a frontline doctor at a rural AIDS clinic in a small HIV-ravaged country called Lesotho.
He was one of the founders of the Canadian chapter for Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, an organization that's provided support to thousands of people over the last few decades here in Canada.
He was the doctor, I was the lawyer, but it was his idea to document the torture in a fashion that could be used as evidence, and we put that before the tribunal.
I think a generation of us as physicians and other healthcare workers now recognize that this has to be a part of our work, that we can't see people who are homeless and not talk about housing. We can't see people who need medication but can't afford it. And I think in many ways he's been that role model for many of us.
Philip is often seen as his persona as a bit of a rebel. He's earned that reputation, I would say, but there is another side to Philip, and he's actually a very humble man.
For me, it's more juvenile rage at the abuse of power. It's the best way I can summarize why I do what I do.
His work has been able to show many of us the full potential of what it means to be a physician. I think that is a tremendous legacy.
Canadian Medical Hall of Fame laureate, Dr. Philip Berger.